Well, the title of a forthcoming book of mine is called Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper Digital Era. So the framing of the book is pointing to exactly what you're asking about, which is the impact of AI and other disruptive technologies in business. And the way I frame this is, Netscape went public on August 8th, 1995, and that is typically used as like the starting gun. Where this whole digital disruption and digital transformation started. That's typically remembered as the starting point. None of us remember Netscape. None of us remember their story of what happened, but we remember that starting point, right? And what I believe is that in 20 years from now, we'll look back and we'll go, oh, in November of 2022, when ChatGPT was released, that was really the turning point for a new era, what I frame as the hyper digital era. And what I think is going to be distinctly different about the next 20 years is that although we've done a lot in improving customer experiences, connecting with new types of devices and Internet of Things capabilities. Really, productivity within companies hasn't changed that dramatically, right? Like we're on a basically like a 2% productivity gain every year. Like that's the typical productivity gain. What I think is going to be distinctly different is that you are going to see a in-company productivity leaps by 10 to 100x because of the thoughtful application of AI and other disruptive technologies. So I think that's what's coming at us, which means that senior leaders have to get really good at these things that I call big bets, right? These are the transformations we're talking about. Because if you don't develop a core competency in the ability to change, the ability to innovate, the ability to test out new concepts, you will be one of the casualties of this upcoming era. But if you can build a core leadership competency of how do we actually experiment and make substantial change happen, it's going to be a tremendous era for companies to capture market, to serve customers in new ways, and to be one of the winners out of this era.
Yeah, it's funny because up until now, IT is always kind of technology from a company standpoint is always, unless you're a tech company, obviously, is always touted it as like we're here to save you money and make make you more efficient. And if you look at companies traditionally in the past 15 years, it's like IT is just another cost because, as you said, it really hasn't changed a lot of the productivity over the past couple years or last 15 years. And
Well,
like you said,
I was going to say, and you know this probably better than I do, which is IT organizations have a very difficult job to do. On one hand, their job is to make the status quo very stable, very operational, and to actually work, right? On the other hand, their job is to be these agents of change, right? Agile and launching new products. Those two things tend not to go well together. And so what typically happens, and this is just one manifestation of this, which is the now, this quarter, this year, today wins out over inventing, testing, experimenting in new concepts. So one of the fundamental things you just have to recognize is that asking the same people to be accountable for operational excellence today, that can be really tough to also ask them to be the agents of change and the agents of innovation within their organization. I'm not suggesting that you have to separate the organization or you need different departments, but you do have to recognize the complexity of the mission that you are asking them to accomplish, and that the incentives tend to reward us for just make sure today works well. That's where most of the incentives are focused at.
So I think a lot of companies don't have that kind of mindset on being able to be agile, being able to do those things. And like I said, I think if you're going to be successful in the next 5 to 10 years, if you don't embrace this technology, if you don't embrace it, you're going to die. You will
You,
not make it. It's like going back to the 1920s and say, you know what, you can't have phones. You're going to do everything via, you're going to send all your mail via, horses and horse and carriage. And it's like, you just can't, you cannot be profitable in that type of thing. So yeah, if you don't do that, if your company isn't set up like that, then it's going to be hard. And I think a lot of companies right now are set up old school where they don't champion change. They don't champion these being agile. And I think so. Do you think you learned a lot of that in Amazon? What was the Amazon leadership culture that impacted kind of what you do? Because I think that is a much different culture than a lot of corporate companies are right now.
yeah. So first, I would not just agree with all your points. I would double down on all the points you just made there. When I do keynotes, I'll ask an audience. I'll say, who here believes that innovation and fundamental change is required for your organization over the next 5 to 10 years, right? Everybody will raise their hand. And then I'll ask, who has a deliberate system, a process for how you do new business incubation or innovation or these transformations, and everything, right? Like where you lead with hypothesis-led ideas, you recognize them as bets, you have true agile minimalist testing, and you understand that there's a portfolio involved here and not one idea involved here. Nobody raises their hand. And it's that fundamental disconnect that we know this is critical, but yet we aren't willing to do the things we know that are needed for anything important to happen, which is you have to have a system for it, right? You have to have definition and resources and decisions and people applied to it with real focus to it. Like you have to do those things or it won't just happen, right? This stuff doesn't happen by accident. So this is absolutely the playbook of Amazon, and why I think they're unique's a big word. I don't know if they are actually unique, but I think they are fairly unique in this, which is they are both a world-class operating company and they're systematic about their innovation. So they've solved for this very challenge that we're just talking about, which is you have to both operate in the here and now and not or, and you have to be a systematic innovator. And that's the work I do with my clients at both small companies, mid-sized companies, and large clients is like, well, how do we put in the right playbook for us on that new business incubation and innovation front? And that's what led me to write the Amazon Way and Think Like Amazon, and now Big Bet Leadership is solving for that exact problem, which is all companies are almost fully indexed on their operating playbook for today, and they are very underdeveloped. Like an athlete that's just completely over muscled in one area, they have no muscles in this new business incubation or innovation playbook that's needed. And part of the problem is that the language we use really matters when we're talking about this. And we tend to use words that are very similar between these two playbooks. For example, we talk about projects, right? So we'll talk about a project in our operating playbook, a project. I have to upgrade this system, or I have to build a new fulfillment center, or whatever it is. That's a project. But then when we're innovating, we also use this word project, right? Like, oh, I have a project to test out this concept. Well, people that are in the operating business, they go, oh, I know projects. I know how to do these things well, and everything. These are completely different animals, completely different animals. So one of the things I work very hard at my clients on is wording really matters here. When we are talking about our operating playbook, we'll talk about projects. But when we are talking about innovation or new business incubation, I like to use the word bets, right? This is where Big Bet Leadership comes from. I like to use the word bets because a bet infers, I think this is a good idea, but I don't know for sure. There is a very real chance of quote unquote failure on this, that the experiment may not work, but that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to find out whether the experiment works or not. Okay, so now when I start creating separate swim lanes for projects versus bets, then I'm going down the right path of like, these are distinctly different things. I have to have all this different types of both mentality and understanding and processes around these things that are fundamentally different than how I operate in my normal playbook. But people don't get that subtlety of how language really matters in order to drive true change, both at the individual leader level as well as at the greater organizational level.